My name's Murti. I'm the co-founder of Feminists for Liberty. We are smashing sexism and the state by uplifting libertarian feminist voices, changing the narratives about libertarianism and feminism, and looking at mainstream feminist issues through a free market, classically liberal lens. We don't have a lot of time to talk today. I've got some really awesome ladies on stage with me, so I'd really like to ask you all, share this video, use the hashtag LibertyCon 22, and let's keep this conversation going on and offline. So with no further ado, right to my right, or I guess your left, I have Hannah Cox. Many of you probably know her as the co-host of the Base podcast, but I actually met Hannah when she was working at Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty. And our conversations slowly went from the inequitable, inhumane, and frankly, ineffective criminal justice system we have in this country to our personal views on abortion and gender justice and way too much edgelording in the libertarian community. So I was always struck by how consistently kind and compassionate and intellectually consistent Hannah was. So it's no surprise to me that she's now one of the most effective libertarian activists in the online space. Thank you for being here, Hannah.
Thank you, Kat. That's very generous. And I think we had that whole conversation waiting in line for drinks. So we just skipped the small talk, got right to the things that mattered. But I've always admired your work online. I've been following you since before I was in politics, actually, with Cato and your work. So it's good to be here today. And I will say one update, which is that when I agreed to do LibertyCon, this was not yet formalized, but as of 2 weeks ago, we have now taken base politics full time. So that is my full byline now. Brad Palumbo and I will be pursuing that with our entire efforts. So it's no longer just the podcast.
That is good to hear. It's a good podcast. It's going to be amazing to watch what you're doing with that project. And the second incredible lady on stage, I almost feel like I don't have to introduce because I'm pretty sure you all know her and have seen her face and heard her speak by now. But Jo Jorgensen was the 2020 Libertarian Party candidate for president and the only woman to be on the ballot in all 50 states twice.
In the history of the country.
My Feminists for Liberty co-founder, Elizabeth Nolan Brown, actually sat down with Jo on the campaign trail and had a really in-depth conversation with her, so I invite you all to check that out on YouTube sometime later.
Yeah, Elizabeth's great. And by the way, it was during one of the debates that they wouldn't let me in. And so we decided to hold our own.
It was better than debate.
Yeah. Yes.
I've worked on campaigns before. After the campaign, you know, you've been working all day, all night, you're exhausted. Most people step back after a campaign, but Jo has kept up that energy for liberty, and she's now the chair of the board of People for Liberty.
The president. And Dan Fishman says he loves introducing me as President Jo Jorgensen. Too bad it's not the other presidential job, but, you know.
I'm sure you would do way better than the person we have
I
there.
think, yeah, Milton Friedman, wasn't Milton Friedman who said something about, you know, take every third name out of the phone book and they could do better than who we have now in Washington? You could take any third name out of the phone book and it would be better than Biden, so.
With this incredible introduction, like I said, we don't have much time. Let's go ahead and get started. The subject of this panel is the F word, feminism. And feminism really is treated by a lot of people in the liberty circles like a curse, like a horrible thing. We used to hear a lot, feminism is cancer. Now we just hear, don't be a feminist. And I know everyone on this stage and probably many of you watching now, many of the ladies watching now have had their credentials questioned by both the left and the right and how we can be both women and libertarians. So, you know, for me, feminism is just about making sure that mostly the legal barriers, but that everyone has an equal opportunity and has an equal right. They're treated the same regardless of their sex and gender, which to me sounds like a pretty reasonable position to hold. What is feminism and why do people react to it this way? Why is it treated like this anathema, this evil anti-liberty thing?
Well, I'll jump in and just say I think I grew up with that mentality for a long time because I came from the right, and I think most of what I saw feminism was the left's version of it, which was very much a victim mentality. It was people who did not feel they had a lot of autonomy, and I just never identified with that. I always felt really capable and strong and smart and able to kind of pursue my own path. As I aged, though, and I actually entered my career and I started getting around politics more and more, I really started to understand that there were still a lot of legal barriers in our way that were holding us back. I started looking into the history and realized that when I was born, a woman could not get a credit card for a business without a man, right? That's not that long ago. That's pretty shocking. And so as I started looking at that, I kind of came to see it the same way I see systemic racism, where is it necessarily true that we're still implementing these things? Not most of the time, but there are still a lot of things we have to go back and correct from when those laws were implemented. Even if the laws are no longer there, there's many things that are still in place in society that have been built because of those laws that we have to go in and deconstruct. And so that's where I really see it now, and I think that that actually is an empowering way of looking at things. Women can be our own saviors. We can go in, we can fight the state, we can work to dismount some of these things that have been constructed against us. And so I think we just have to reframe what feminism is, what we need to do about it, and really start to lift up our version, which revolves around individual liberty and limiting the government versus looking to the government to come in and save us.
Absolutely, and I think that there has always been that individualist strain of feminism, and it's always been a part of it right from the beginning. There's books written generations ago, from before I was born, that talk about this, and yet we keeps getting pulled back into folks who are either anti-feminists, and so they push back on that, right? Or people who really just want more state control.
Yeah, and that's the biggest problem is what the word means. And for years and years and years, what it meant was we want the government to make special laws for women. And that's really what it means now to most people out there. So what feminism means to most people out there is, okay, we want boards in which there's at least 1 or 2 women on every board. We're the government. We want to hire some contractor, management consultant, whatever. We're going to take into account whether this is a woman-owned business. And so that's the definition that's out there. And it's hard to fight that. And so if you say, I'm a feminist, well, basically it means you're not libertarian. It means you're not going to be chosen because you can do the job best. You're not going to be chosen for the value, and I love John Mackey's talk yesterday, by the way. You're not going to be chosen in a capitalistic system for your for the value that you add. Instead, you're going to be hired because you're a woman. And then the problem is, if you do get on the board or your management consulting firm is chosen for a government project, then everybody treats you as, well, you got it because you're a woman. And then they don't pay much attention to you anyway. And I think I got some of that on the campaign, okay, well, here's the token woman, and what does she know?
Right, yeah, there is very much this attitude, and they've done studies on this, and when there are requirements that a certain class has to be included in something, they actually are... Oh, I'm sorry. I'm much louder now. Okay. Sorry if you haven't heard my brilliant comments up until this point. So there have been studies on this, and when there are requirements for for certain seats to be held for a certain group or things like that, they're actually less effective, in part because of these attitudes. And so we're not achieving feminist ideals, through these restrictions. And at the same time, I think that we're losing a really important part of the message, which is that for the story of women's liberation is in many ways a story of economic liberty. As Hannah mentioned, women, for the most part, for most of history in most of the world, were not allowed to participate in markets. It's not just women, it's many other groups. The vast majority of people were not, and still are not, allowed to participate in markets fully or freely. And so as economic liberty has spread, as we've had more and more access to markets, that's where the freedom has come from, and that's what I think something that we need to talk about and we need to preserve.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely something we need to talk about. We need to encourage women and empower women to go out and seize the day, right? And we see that happening right now in America, and that's something we don't celebrate enough. We have so many businesses that are being opened by women. Once we've removed these barriers, we have seen tremendous growth in what we can do in the actual economic sector. But I think that we continue to have groups like the SBA, which I testified before the Senate about earlier this year, that comes in and they want to say, we're going to give you all these handouts, we're going to target it for women businesses, we're going to try to make sure that we're empowering women, right? Excuse me. And what that actually does is I think it undermines us. And it makes the rest of society look at women and say, see, they're only succeeding because of affirmative action. They're only succeeding because they get these handouts from the government. And it actually sort of turns the tide against us. And I think that's why you see some pushback against feminism, against women's rights, especially from men's groups, because they start to have this animosity of like, you're getting a free handout, you're getting a leg up, I'm not. And so while women are being able to take advantage of things in the market and succeed, when the government continues to try to come in and treat us like we're the victims, it gives the rest of society that mentality. And so we have to continue working to, I think, remove that. We're fighting for equal opportunity. Feminism is about fighting for the equality of the sexes. I think that means, and I think, Kat, you agree with this, that means we fight for men's rights too, right? That also means we come in and fight for men who are being disempowered by the state, who have injustice being perpetrated against them by politicians. So I think that's a really important component. And when we do that, I think we do create an actual fair economy and marketplace where everybody can come in and compete and actually succeed on their merits, which is what we should want. We don't want businesses to succeed because they're owned by a woman or they're owned by a man. We want them to succeed because they're offering a really good product at a good price that the general public wants.
Right, and there's no reason to believe that a woman would not be able to offer a really good product at a really good price that the public wants.
Exactly.
Yeah, you mentioned equality, though, and so many people misunderstand equality versus equity, and they think of equity. And even if you throw around words like that, then people think, oh, okay, so now we're back to 2 women on the board or whatever. And really, my definition of feminism, and by the way, I don't use the word, but my definition is just don't have any laws against me and leave me alone. You know, let's have that for the entire population, regardless of who you are. Just no laws against you, whether you're a woman, whether you're gay, whether you're black, Hispanic, don't have any laws against you, and then just be left alone to succeed.
I think, yeah, so I think that you've both brought up really important points about this is not, you know, when people think about feminism, we think about women. And we think about women oftentimes, you know, people say it's like, it's in the root of the word, but it's not just about that. The state oppresses people along sex and gender lines that are not only women. There's so many policies ranging for things like selective services or honestly even access to guns and things like that that really are gendered. So why, so I'll hold it in this hand, maybe that'll help. So why then do people keep coming back to this idea that if you're a feminist, you hate men?
Well, I think because a significant portion of the feminist movement does hate men, right? And I think that we have to be able to call that out on the left. I think there's been a corruption that we saw where you had first wave feminism that was really great, and it's about getting basic rights for women, the right to vote, the right to work. Then you had second wave feminism that kind of came through and was dealing with very significant issues in the culture about how we were treated. And now you have what would be called third wave feminism, which is where I kind of break with the traditional feminist movement and why I think we need to build our own within liberty spaces to get back to the real roots and origins of what feminism was about, because we do see a corrosion on the left where I think, one, they've maybe run out of things to do when it comes to their agenda, right? They are now kind of getting into things that I don't think the government should always be involved in. And I think that a lot of them just really do dislike men and look down on men, and that's not where we're coming from. So I think it's important to sort of part with that. And I also think it's important as we look at where feminism needs to go, that we start to recognize there is still a lot of work to be done, but not all of it is political, or not all of it is government, at least, right? There's still a lot of things that happen in work environments that I know are really scary for a lot of women. There's still a lot of things I've experienced, even in my own career, where I have been mistreated in work environments, and you can't always prove it's because you know you're a woman, but you know it's because you're a woman.
Yeah, and can I mention and you said you've been mistreated. I'm a few years older than you are, so when my then husband and I bought our first house, he had to leave the room while I spoke alone with the lawyers because they had to make sure that my husband wasn't forcing me to do. It was the law that my husband had to leave the room.
I had to legally appear to get my marriage license. I am married by the state. I know that's like questionable for a lot of you people, but myself included. But I had to appear to get my marriage license. My husband was not required to appear. In the state of Maryland, he actually did not have to be at the wedding at all.
of course.
Wow.
And here's kind of a crazy one, nothing to do with the law, but back in the olden days, you may have seen what are called swimming caps. They're these like rubber things that go over your head. It looks like, you know, one of these bald things for TV. And women were always required to wear them, but men weren't, because traditionally women had longer hair, men had short hair. So we're in the 70s, you know, some women had very short hair, kind of the Mia Farrow.
I had to wear swim caps in swimming lessons too. It was a girl's rule.
Including me, so I had very, very short hair. I went to a swimming pool. Didn't bring a swimming cap because I'm thinking my hair is shorter than most men. This is very short. And there was a guy there with long hair about like mine is, and basically they told me I had to wear the swimming cap, and they told him he didn't. And I'm like, do you see the length of his hair? Didn't matter, I was a woman. So yeah, but you know, you mentioned workplace. Here's a bigger problem, really, and it goes beyond feminism. The bigger problem here is, you know, women are now about 50% of the workforce. I mean, we're traditionally very low, you know, just working in the back rooms as secretaries. And now we've made great strides. If we had a truly free market country, then companies would live and die by how they treated women, by how they treated gays and so forth. And so what would be nice is if corporations had a culture, you were talking about, had a culture that wasn't conducive for women, they would go out of business. But unfortunately, our tax dollars are being spent by politicians, and they're accepting bribes from companies. So now these companies can stay in, you know, at the top and basically not have to treat people as well in a free market sense where it's competition. And I know that Disney has been a very kind of touchy subject lately, and I haven't used them as an example because there has been political controversy in the state we're in. But a lot of people don't realize that in 1993, 1994, they offered benefits to gay spouses, even though they weren't legally married. I mean, that was 10, 15 years before the government started doing this. In 2012, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were still saying that it should be illegal to be married if you're gay. And yet we have the free market, a company offering what the government isn't. And if the government didn't have so much power, we would see competition. Now, would there be companies that discriminated against? Yeah, but they wouldn't rise to the top.
I think you bring up a really important point, because I've worked at places as well where prior to the Obergefell decision, which I think is a good thing, I think everyone's marriage should be equally recognized in as much as the state recognizes marriage, right? Prior to that, there are places I worked where you didn't have to be legally married to put your partner on your health insurance, and that disappeared after everyone could be legally married, right? Because they were competing on that point. They were saying, I'm a safe space for people who are in non-traditional marriages, however you want to define that there, but then that disappeared. And I think we see the same thing. Right now we're in a space where a lot of companies, mostly in the private sector, mostly in places like Silicon Valley, are really competing on the benefits that they offer around childcare, around
Flexible work.
Flexible
In fact,
work,
do you
these
mind
kinds
if
of
I-
things. Yeah, and I'll let you go in a second, but the thing that I'm worried about is that as we're really pushing this government top-down style of childcare, which, by the way, most families say that they don't want. They actually want that flexibility. They don't want to be able to leave their baby in a state-run center from morning till night every day. I had a baby because I want to hang out with my baby, to be honest. But
but yeah, I wanted to mention my own personal encounter with this. I worked for IBM. That was my first job after I got my MBA. And you look at, you know, and IBM, by the way, early on was very good about not discriminating. And the Rookie of the Year for the entire country was a woman salesperson. This was about 1980 out of West Virginia. The Rookie of the Year where I was based, and I was based out of Fort Worth, Texas at the time, was a black man from British Guiana. And so if you had, you know, the Venn diagram, which if anybody has seen Kamala's little thing on that, I can give a much more serious discussion of that. But if you've got more people in the pool to choose from, then you're going to be more successful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. But I think also a lot of times the state is actually superseding the free market solutions. They're coming in there. The free market forces people to compete, and increasingly, as more and more groups are becoming more equal, they have to compete for their dollars, they have to compete for their labor, they have to compete for their attention. And when the state comes in and creates these programs that are supposedly supposed to be achieving these same means, it might help a few people, but in the long run, it has all these negative impacts, and it kind of locks us into a state of time. It prevents more progress happening.
Yeah, well, keep in mind, this was 1980, before we had as much government regulation as we do now. Although I actually was kind of discriminated against, you know, in an informal way, but overall, IBM did a great job of, you know, treating everybody, because they knew, you know, the whole Milton Friedman argument. So we got more people to choose from, we're more likely to get the best people.
Yeah. Well, not only are you going to prevent the market from being able to adapt as quickly when you implement these government programs, right? We've seen that. And in the 30s, when they came in and they implemented things like the 40-hour work week, these were seen as great workers' rights. Nowadays, I'm like, that sounds horrible. Who wants to sit in a desk from 9 to 5? Who needs to sit
If you're
in a
not
desk
even being productive,
from
when
9
you
to
do
5?
most of your work at home on your phone.
It's stupid. It actually produces a lower quality of life. And I think we would have seen things like remote work and many of the flexible schedules we're moving towards be implemented a lot sooner had it not been for government coming in and codifying these kinds of schedules and then tying them to benefits, right? Legally tying it to insurance benefits. That prohibits companies from being as feasible and able to adapt to where things are going. So I think it actually does hold you back. And then when you look at what I think the left's feminist movement is currently trying to do with things around Me Too, their solutions are state-oriented, right? They want to use the state to come in and fix these things. And I think it's actually more on us. I think it's more on us as individuals in our workplaces. And I've had the incredible experience in recent years of working around a lot of men who I can watch and see are becoming more cognizant of this, or watching out for when men are being creepy in the workplace environment, or looking out for when, you know, a woman's constantly targeted and asked to book the catering even though that's not her job. Right? I see this happening, and I think that that's an empowering thing for men and women when we look at where we still need to go with feminism, to look to ourselves and to figure some of this out within our own communities and our own workplace environments and keep the state out of it.
Yeah, you know, I'm sorry, you mentioned codifying, and I want to mention, so many people out there say, well, if it weren't for the government, you know, we'd still have 6-year-olds in the factory. If it weren't for the government, you know, everybody would have to go to a smoky restaurant. You wouldn't have a choice. But what they don't know is that we didn't have laws against child labor until families could afford it. They're not going to pass laws until basically society has accepted it.
Well, not only that, child labor had started to fall before they passed those laws.
Exactly, because
people
they
had
could afford
stopped
it.
wanting to go to smoky restaurants before they passed those
Well,
laws.
and
culture
even,
changes, the laws catch up, and then the laws lock the culture in place.
well, and I think an even better example than that would be airlines. A lot of people don't realize that Northwest Airlines banned smoking on all their flights before the government ever did. So it's not like the government comes in and says, you know, this is a really great idea. How about let's ban smoking on, which, by the way, no, I'm against. I mean, you know, if a bunch of people want to fly smoking, fine with me. I won't be on that plane, but, you know,
I've always
if
wondered
others want-
how cost-effective it would be for them to have a smokers-only flight.
Also a kids-only flight.
Yeah.
I would for sure pay more to be on like a kid-free flight. 100%.
Having flown a lot with a baby, I totally understand.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought now, but the point is the government can't, and you know, I was happy to have the choice of a no smoking flight, but it wasn't the government who gave me that flight or that choice. it was society in which smoking rates dropped from over 50% of men, and it was about 50% total, a little more for men, a little under for women. It's because society changed. There were fewer people smoking. So then the free market comes up, Northwest Airlines, and says, tell you what, we'll have non-smoking flights. And then the government, kind of, leading from behind, oh yeah, great idea. So no, it's not again, back to your comment about codifying, it's not the government who's fixing these things. It's societies, it's our values, it's our perceptions, it's how we're moving along, how we're evolving.
Well, so I think as libertarians, we believe and we talk about these things like the marketplace of ideas and the necessity for individuals, civil society to make changes. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. But when people think about feminism, a lot of times they are thinking about laws. But a lot of what, for instance, Hannah, you were talking about how workplaces are changing. That's happening because of these conversations, but and I do think that these conversations need to happen, right? Because that's how we change things in the marketplace of ideas. What we need to do, though, is keep it in those conversations, keep it in that civil change, not then try to bring in the big hand of government to solidify it in a way that's actually going to hurt us in the long run.
Well, that's right, and I like what you said a minute ago. Culture changes, and then politics flows downstream from that. And that's something I've seen over and over and over in my time passing bills in this country, is you've got to move the culture first. That's why Brad and I started Base Politics. We firmly believe that the battle place is actually in media and entertainment, because that's what's impacting the culture. And then as you start to move the grassroots, then you can organize them and get them to come pass legislation. And so we want to have a massive network of people like you guys where we can start deploying this and saying, you know what, right now we need to talk about this issue. This is the hot button issue, but we need a bunch of people from a liberty perspective on TikTok, on podcasts, on YouTube, writing articles, on social media, hammering this in. And when we do that, you can really start to spur change. The problem is that we have not always fought on the right battlegrounds, and the left is organized on this, and the right is pretty organized on this. If you go on TikTok right now, you're going to find a lot of Marxist communists on there debating how ethical paying rent is, right? Which is ludicrous, but they're there. And they're preaching to the people they're trying to convert, and they are swaying them. They're giving stories, right? They're giving their own personal stories. Stories change people's hearts and minds. This is how you have to fight. We have to do the same thing, but we cannot just sit and talk to ourselves. We have to go out and talk to people who disagree with us, who are different from us, and really give our experiences and perspectives, and most importantly, our solutions. Because I think what people often hear from our camp is us saying no, 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 and there's a lot to say no to, because both sides have really, really bad ideas. But what they don't hear oftentimes is our solution. And I think when we can give that to them and get in front of them with it, we can really start to move quickly.
Yeah, we're almost out of time, but you just really set me up for the final point that I wanted us to discuss. People often ask me, and you guys have heard us here today, we're talking about pretty mainstream libertarian views, right? So they're like, so why say you're a feminist? Why bother saying you're a libertarian feminist and not just say you're a libertarian? You're talking about human liberty. And I think a lot of it is this: if we're not in those spaces, we're not willing to talk to feminists, if we're not willing to weigh in on those issues, if we're not willing to come at it from a perspective where we're not necessarily attacking the idea of feminism, but moving into that space, showing that we care about that space, but then showing how the same goals that they want to achieve are not achieved by their means, but by our means, that's how we actually make effective change.
Yeah, and you make a good point. I don't just, in a vacuum, go out there and say, I'm a feminist. Because people would misunderstand me. They would think that I want exactly 2.5 women on every board in the country. So I don't refer to myself as a feminist. I refer myself to a libertarian. Now, were I talking to a group of women or a group of feminists? Absolutely, I'm a feminist, and let me explain to you the libertarian definition of feminism. However, there is a backlash in our movement, in the party, for going out and reaching to these groups. And I discovered this. Now, keep in mind, you have to run the campaign you were given. I was nominated, 4 days before George Floyd, and so that dominated the news. I wanted to talk about my three issues were healthcare, the environment, and bringing the troops home. I found myself in a completely different campaign. And so we went out and talked about this because, you know, first of all, you have to talk about what people are interested in. But secondly, that would make us look very tone deaf and callous to not say, yes, that's awful that a police officer had his knee on the neck. And I don't care how George Floyd died, you don't have your knee on the neck of a person.
And I don't know how you can be an advocate for human liberty and not care deeply about issues like that.
Exactly. So one of the people I talked with was a local Black Lives Matter leader who had been in prison. He was now a preacher. And I said, well, do you know what? Here's the libertarian position. Just because you're in prison doesn't mean you shouldn't have the right to own a gun. You have the right to self-defense. And he was like, wow, nobody's ever said that to me. And I said, and by the way, you know that bus that Rosa Parks was on? Did you realize that was a government-run, government-owned bus? He's like, no, I didn't. And so all I did was have a conversation with one Black Lives Matter local leader, very local leader, and I was skewered, and I'm still being skewered. I've been accused of marching with Black Lives Matter. I've been skewered for saying that we shouldn't go out there and be racist. So the problem is
no racism.
So the problem with the Libertarian Party and some in the movement is that when you do try to reach out to people and try to speak their language, I don't know if they thought I was going to become a Black Lives Matter member. All I'm trying to do, you know, when you sell something, and I was a salesperson, that's what I did at IBM, you need to go after the people who are looking to buy, somebody who has a need, and you show them how you can fulfill the need. So Black Lives Matter, they were halfway there saying the government sucks. And so I can say, you're right, and let me show you how to fix it. I think that's much more productive than talking to people who say, no, I like the government. Government's fine, no problem. So at least go after the people who have the need.
Well, and I will just say this. Not everybody knows what a libertarian is, so I don't think it's all-encompassing when you're talking to people outside of our bubble. Secondarily, not all libertarians are consistent on this issue, unfortunately. And thirdly, I think it's important to use language that connects with the people you're trying to reach. And so when we're talking about feminism, that's a known word, right? That's a good starting place, and we can start to then express where we break with what is seen as traditional feminism and where we agree and what our solutions are. So I think language matters. There's a lot of people that want to run away from language. I see the same thing when I talk about capitalism. Some people are like, don't use capitalism. That's the word that was made up to use against us. I'm like, that's the word they're using, though.
Yeah.
If I come in here and I talk about free markets, half these people have no clue what I'm talking about. I have to fight.
Or they agree with you, and then they hold a whole different view than you do.
Yes. So you've got to use the common language. You have to use the common vernacular and be able to better define it and be able to shape it. And I think that a lot of people don't necessarily want to go to the front lines. And I get it, because going to the front lines can be hard. You're going to be criticized by lots of people when you do it. But it's worth it, and you can win. And I've seen this over and over throughout most of my career. I've fortunately been in a position where I'm working on issues that have bipartisan support, especially criminal justice reform. And so because of that, I've gotten to work around people on the far left and the far right. And I can tell you this, we're not as far apart as it seems if you just look at social media or the mainstream media. I think most of us actually agree on many of the big problems in society. We just have different prescriptions for what would solve them, and that's because we lack a common understanding of what created them in the first place. And so if you can really start having those conversations and get to those root problems with people, I found that you can tend to build coalitions of support pretty quickly for things that we care about. I think we just have to go out there and be good representatives and do a better job of defending and expressing and explaining our ideas.
I think that that is the perfect place to leave this part of the discussion. As I said, I really think that this is an ongoing conversation that we need to be having in our communities, that we need to be participating in, that we need to be taking to all of those other communities that we are interfacing with as individuals. And this is our opportunity to really build a freer world for everybody. And so thank you all.
Thank you,
Jo.
Had a great time.